Hey, this is E-Rock and welcome back to the Late Night Saga. Today I'm going to review a mini-series called Mrs. America. I became aware of this show because of a clip on YouTube from Mrs. America where they reenact an episode of Tomorrow with Tom Snyder. That's where it intersects with the Late Night Saga. I had never seen Snyder depicted in a movie before, I don't think, other than by himself. Post-production E-Rock here. If you only came here for the clickbaity thumbnail, jump to the timestamp below where after giving my thoughts on Mrs. America, I will dissect the Tomorrow Show reenactment in more detail. Now back to the review. But I don't just want to review that scene, I want to see the context of the whole thing, so I want to review the whole miniseries and give it its due. Mrs. America, 9 episodes. It tells the story of the attempts to pass the Equal Rights Amendment in the 70s. ERA. The title character is Kate Blanchett as Phyllis Schlafly, who was a conservative trying to stop ERA. That was the name of her movement. And the other headliner that kind of got a lot of attention, I think, was Rose Byrne playing Gloria Steinem. Gloria Steinem is a famous women's rights advocate from the 70s and still today. But what this miniseries did that I thought was really nice was it showed a lot of characters on both sides, the ERA and the Stop ERA movement, and fleshed out lots of other historical characters and other people in the movements. In fact, each episode of the series is named after one character, except for the Tom Snyder episode, which is named after 4 characters. But we'll get to that. But each episode focuses mostly on one character, but of course you still see everything else going on around them with all the other characters in both camps. By making one character the focus of each episode, it kind of was able to tell how, their interest in the proceedings and how they got there, and gave the actors more of a spotlight. This movie's really packed with great actors, not just the ones I already mentioned, Kate Blanchett and Rose Byrne, but maybe most impressively for me was Margot Martindale playing Bella Abzug, who seems to be the real cement holding the whole women's movement together, at least in this movie. And I remember her from Dexter, of course. Then you've got Tracy Ullman as Betty Friedan, who I guess they say they give her credit in this for at least kickstarting the feminist movement, at least this chapter of it. I guess she had written a book that kind of kicked the whole thing off. So when the movie begins, or miniseries, we're now like 10 years in, and this whole women's movement has grown and organized, and now they're trying to pass the ERA. The title character, of course, is Phyllis Schlafly, played by Kate Blanchett, and it's sort of interesting that as this show begins, she's already been in Congress a couple times, they say. She's got a lot of contacts in Washington. She can talk to senators and representatives. And they talk about how she was a college-educated, nuclear physicist. So her interest was more in defense and in the nuclear arms race. And it becomes clear very early on that she's not going to be taken seriously, I guess because she's a woman, that all the men in the room aren't listening to her. They don't care what she thinks about that topic. They do care what she thinks about women's rights because that's becoming a hot button issue. And so she realizes that if she wants to have a seat at the table at all, it has to be by taking up this issue, the ERA, which she doesn't have any real interest in. So that's the way that the movie kind of portrays her in a negative light, sort of an opportunist. Like, she doesn't care about the issue she's representing. She just wants power, or she wants to be part of the conversation, really. It's not a complete hatchet job in that way. I was kind of worried at the beginning that they were going to make it kind of like Oliver Stone made W, that movie about George W. Bush. And I think at the time everyone thought, at least I thought going in, that Stone was known as kind of a liberal activist back then. And I think since then he's taken on more conservative issues. He's probably sort of bipartisan, but I think at the time everyone thought he was going to make a real statement on George W. Bush, that he was like 3rd generation oil man. He's, over there spending American lives in this Middle Eastern war so he can get oil profits, which the movie does make that claim about Dick Cheney, but not about George W. Bush. The movie's approach to George is that he's sort of a well-meaning idiot. He's kind of like Forrest Gump. He sort of stumbles backwards through all these important historical events, and he doesn't really know what's happening, which in my review at the time I said was probably the kindest insult they could have paid him, which was to say that he was not evil, he was a well-meaning idiot. So I was wondering if that's how this was going to look at Phyllis Schlafly, saying that she's not bad, but she's also dumb, or she's whatever. They didn't really do that. They obviously make her very intelligent in the movie, very aggressive, She's able to sort of make something from nothing. She's able to create this whole movement on her side. But what's interesting is that they don't really say she's anti-women's empowerment. She's taking on this opportunity because it's going to get her closer to being able to talk about arms. The arms race, the nuclear issue, that's what she's really interested in. The most biting commentary probably comes, and it comes again from Bella Abzug later in the series, when they're talking about how the Stop ERA people don't want the destruction of the family unit. They don't want women in the workplace because who's going to raise the kids? And by the end of it, of course, all the women are working. They're all out campaigning. They're all setting up offices. They're doing all this work. And it's like, you are women in the workplace, even though you're trying to stop the ERA from passing. So they do allow the character a little dimension. Of course, she has a lot of conversations with her husband about sort of the roles in the marriage and in society. They are thoughtful about these things. It's interesting, Schlafly has to align herself in order to get enough, voting power to oppose the ERA people. She aligns herself with a lot of people that are much more conservative than her, and a lot of white power, a lot of anti-homosexual groups, which she may or may not believe in herself. And then, of course, later in the series, they hint at the fact that her son is gay and her daughter is becoming a feminist. And, she still loves them. They're her kids, so she has to sort of wrestle with that. So there's a little bit of nuance in that sense. And likewise, on the side of the feminists, they're not all spotless. They all have egos. They clash their personalities. They get emotional. They get tired of doing it. Like I said, it seemed like Bella Abzug was really the glue holding it all together for a long stretch. Gloria Steinem gets a lot of credit, and she has her own magazine, so maybe her name was out there a little more. But in this series, they make her seem a little flaky. Although she shows up to all the events, she doesn't do a whole lot. She keeps talking about a book she's trying to write, but she never finishes writing it. Meanwhile, all of her friends are writing books and getting published. People are trying to pass legislation. They're trying to get things done. She's showing up and kind of being the face of their movement, but it doesn't seem like she's doing a lot of the work, and she seems a little flaky. There's a nice episode in the middle that focuses on Shirley Chisholm, who was the first black female vice presidential candidate for a major party, at least. She ran with McGovern, and she's played by Uzo Aduba, and she does a great job. Of course, we remember her as Crazy Eyes on Orange is the New Black. She does a great job of playing this really aggressive, really intelligent, just powerful character. And I didn't know anything about her in real life, so she probably could carry her own series or her own documentary. So that's what was great, kind of all these little mini documentaries. And you had a whole episode about Jill Rickenhouse, played by Elizabeth Banks, and she does a great job. She does a great job of kind of balancing. They say she's the conservative feminist, so she's like the only Republican Party member who's with the pro-ERA people, and so she's kind of got a foot in both worlds. So there's a lot of that in this series. Maybe the oddest thing is there's an episode towards the end. I think it's episode 8 of 9 with Sarah Paulson. I guess she plays a fictional character. Most of the other characters are based on real people, but they said they had to have a couple characters to sort of, like, if we have 10 different stories about people in this movement, they only have one tiny little scene. Let's link all those scenes and just make them one character. I think that's kind of what it means. I don't know that they've made up events or not. But she has a whole episode where she goes to the National Women's Conference and she mixes pills with alcohol. She gets totally high and she just stumbles around in this fog, and it's just like she's in some kind of a feminist funhouse. And I think over the course of this long night, she gets converted over to she's Phyllis Schlafly's sidekick, and then she gets converted over to the feminist side throughout the episode. So it was just like a strange episode in the middle of this whole thing. It was kind of awesome in a way. It was really weird. That stood out. So to bring this all back to where I started, the Tom Snyder show, Tomorrow Show. Phyllis Schlafly had been invited by Brenda Fasteau to debate publicly on the issues because she felt that Phyllis Schlafly wasn't really all that educated and she could beat her easily. So Schlafly changed the conditions of the debate. She went to Tom Snyder and asked to be on his show. She brought her husband with her, who was a lawyer who could cite all this case law, and invited Brenda Fasteau to bring her husband with her, and then the four of them together would have a couples debate. And we can do a compare and contrast because the actual episode of Snyder is on YouTube. You can watch that. Okay, when I made this comment, I had remembered seeing part of the original Tomorrow episode on YouTube, but upon searching it again for this video, I found that the only clips of it that exist have been uploaded by the Phyllis Schlafly Eagles, who apparently have the entire episode in their archives but have only shared selected clips which support their argument, which is that this recreation of the Tomorrow Show in Mrs. America gets almost everything wrong. I mean, they did a great job with the set, the costumes, recreating the look of the original show. Bobby Cannavale is playing Tom Snyder. I haven't seen anybody else play Tom Snyder, I don't think, in a movie. It's certainly not a parody like Dan Aykroyd was known for, but he doesn't have that much to do other than act a little befuddled trying to herd cats on his show. Ed Martin, president of the Phyllis Schlafly Eagles, on his YouTube channel has made numerous videos pointing out what he claims are factual inaccuracies in Mrs. America. Most specifically, the mic drop moment when Brenda Feigen-Fastow catches Phyllis Schlafly citing a fake court case to support her argument.
I mean, the courts would decide, as they did with a recent Washington, D.C. case, where 3 children were given to the father, and the mother had to pay child support.
What was the name of the
crazy to say
case?
that was an advance for women, not
Cite
just in
the
divorce.
case.
The case? Well, I'd have to look it up. But the point is...
You don't know the name of the case?
Well, there's so many cases. We don't have time to cite them all.
Just cite
we don't
the
have
one
time
case.
to cite them
Just
all.
name this one case.
Well, I think it was Foley versus Langham or Lancaster, something like that.
No, there is no such case.
Oh, yes, there is. But you see...
Did you just make up the
I'm
case?
not a lawyer.
Martin claims that in reality the opposite happened. The Schlaflys caught Fastow fabricating facts.
Many lending institutions count a woman's income only for half of what it is if she is married and between the ages of 20 and 44 and cannot show that she has been sterilized. Okay. That goes for banks, that goes for department stores.
Are you saying that they inquire if women are sterilized?
Absolutely.
There isn't any place that does that. There isn't any place that does
What I
that.
would
They
like...
ask also about the methods of
one
birth
place that
control.
does that.
They do.
Just name one. Give me the name of one institution that does that.
I'd like to continue. There's a bank in Queens. I'm not going to name the name.
No, you're not. I don't think there is such. I've never heard of one.
Although it seems to me she stopped short of fabricating names. Still, for Mrs. America to omit the fact that Fastow was caught doing almost the same thing they accused Schlafly of doing is bad form, to be sure. As for the show's accusation that Schlafly cited a fake court case on The Tomorrow Show, since we don't have the entire show for reference, it's hard to say. Certainly, Schlafly's Eagles could put this question to rest if they would produce the entire show, which they haven't. Brenda Feigen herself responded to the question about Mrs. America.
There's this moment where she cites a case and the actor is playing you in that scene kind of pounces on her and it turns out that case does not exist. Is that pretty close to what you remember happening during that debate?
Well, I want to tell you, I'm not sure it was in that debate. It might have been in another debate, but it was definitely in a debate where in real life, where I actually caught her making up a case.
This brings us to another tool that this show, Mrs. America, employs, that of combining quotes or sound bites from various sources into one scene. I wouldn't say this is fabrication, but I think one would have to take great care when pulling quotes out of their original context to keep them framed in the same or similar context. The YouTuber AG has made a great video comparing quotes from the show to real-life quotes they were taken from.
Under our system, in case of the breakup of marriage, the mother gets her children in most cases. Now, who wants to trade that in for a so-called equality, whereby each parent gets one child?
Under our current system, in a case of a breakup of marriage, the mother gets the children. Now, who wants to trade that in for a so-called equality, whereby each parent gets one child?
Does she wear the pants in the family?
No, she doesn't. I'm obviously physically larger than she is.
He chins himself 25 times every morning.
She wear the pants in your family?
No, she doesn't. I'm obviously physically larger than she is.
Yeah, well, he chins himself 25 times every morning.
There's so many cases.
You're thinking of the Berman case. That's a different case.
We don't have time to cite them all in ongoing marriages.
One case.
Well, there's so many cases. We don't have time to cite them all.
Just cite
we don't
the
have
one
time
case.
to cite them
Just
all.
name this one case.
You can see that sometimes several quotes from different sources were stitched together into one scene. This is what Brenda Feigen seems to be claiming happened with the Schlafly made up a fake court case scene, that it was taken from another debate other than The Tomorrow Show. Since we don't have footage from those debates, we can't be sure if that's true or not. It has been pointed out that this version of events was taken from Brenda Feigen's memoir, Not One of the Boys. And since the Phyllis Schlafly Eagles didn't produce their video until after Mrs. America had aired, it was the only source to go by at the time. At any rate, The Schlafly Eagles really ought to make the entire Tomorrow Show available, and I would also press the creators of Mrs. America to make all their sources available as well, so we could know how similar this recreation is to reality. The other dig that the show kind of takes at Schlafly in this scene, I think, going into the scene, we see beforehand that Phyllis and her husband seem to be very well rehearsed, very ready for this, they're on the same page, they're a team. And then on the other side, Brenda Fasto and her husband are like, they've had all this personal drama. She's been seeing someone else. They're worried about their relationship. She just found out she's pregnant with his baby. Like, are they going to stay together? There's all this anxiety they have. So they should be like coming apart at the seams. They're totally mad at each other going into the scene. And then when they get on the show, they just completely destroy Phyllis Schlafly in their opinion, in the opinion of the show, I think. They do seem to win the little debate they have. I didn't know if they were trying to say that Phyllis couldn't even beat her on her best day or something like that, because that's kind of how it comes across. So that was kind of a pointed commentary, I think. As far as any sort of political bias in this series, first of all, what's encouraging is that I believe Phyllis Schlafly's son came out as saying this thing was totally wrong about everything. But Gloria Steinem, who's still with us, also said that this movie got everything wrong. So if it's making both sides uncomfortable, seems like it's probably doing a pretty good job.
Well, it would be nice to have the truth, which Mrs. America didn't tell us. I mean, they sent me 2 of the scripts, and they sent Eleanor Smeal 2 of the scripts too. And we read it and we realized the premise was a total lie, you know, that actually Phyllis Schlafly, as far as we could tell, didn't change one vote. It was the insurance companies and the economic interests that defeated the Equal Rights Amendment.
I think one of the overlooked things, and it's overlooked in this movie, my mother mentored women. The movie shows her as quite condescending to her supporters, and it was actually the opposite. She mentored women to get up, get out, and get involved. The other aspect that I think is missed was her warmth. I believe that Cate Blanchett portrays her as very chilly, and you can't inspire women or lead a movement if they find you cold and power hungry, and that she was not.
I feel like the personal part of it that they depicted was not really accurate, but it got the sense of what was going on in my life. It was very hard to watch that and have it be fictionalized and see what they did to it.
Here's what Liza said. Contrary to the depiction of me in episode 7 of Mrs. America, I did not adopt the nickname of Liza in preference to my birth name of Phyllis because of liberal friends at Princeton University or because of political disagreements with my mother, Phyllis Schlafly.
It's not just knowing the history, you have to have story instincts. And so often when we're talking to historical consultants, we'd have very specific questions. So rather than tell us everything you know about 1976 Republican convention, we'd say, here's the story we want to tell that's really emotional. Does this line up with what you know of the history? And if not, like, correct us. Ultimately, like, we're filling in, we're imagining conversations that we were not privy to. And I think, you know, you read their diaries or their memoirs, you read how they write about themselves, and then you have to throw it away and just write. You know, it's going to be a mixture ultimately of your voice and theirs. It's never been, and ironically, often when we got a note back from the network, like, this doesn't sound like them, it was usually in a direct quote. Phyllis Schlafly did an oral history with the Lincoln Library, in 2011, and a lot of the stuff came out of those interviews that she gave. Even stuff that some of the Schlafly children are disputing, but I'm like, it's right there in her interview. Gloria Steinem did an oral history. There's an oral history of Ms. Magazine that we read. So the oral histories are great. What I was told by the legal department at FX is that when you talk to a living person about the story you're telling, you are beholden to their version of the story. Even if their version of the story is self-serving or not factually accurate. So we didn't want to talk to anyone because we weren't doing if I was doing a biopic, for instance, of Gloria, I would want her blessing. I would want her to be a consultant because this is her biography. We're not doing a biography. We're telling a story that involves many women, and they each have sometimes conflicting points of view. So we wanted to stick to the primary sources. I do think you're obligated to tell their version. And, you know, I would challenge the notion that the person's version of what happened 40 years ago is the factual version.
The show is really well put together, really well written and acted. So even if it's not historically accurate, if the story draws you in and gets you thinking about it, and then gets you interested in researching the real history of it, then you'll learn how historically accurate it is or isn't. So I'm just glad that stories like this exist just to pull you in the first place. I think some of the other historical people featured in this show have also appeared on Tomorrow with Tom Snyder, like Bella Abzug. So that's just another connection. That's another reason why this whole thing kind of interested me.
How did Linda Lovelace and Gloria Steinem join forces? How did the two of you get together?
I saw Linda on the Phil Donahue show, and she was being questioned by Phil, who I think is usually a more sensitive questioner than he was this time, and by the audience with enormous disbelief.
Is there something about the way you were raised, in your view, that made you vulnerable to this?
And yet she was still being asked what in her background had led her to become essentially a hostage.
What did lead you to become a hostage, if we could now ask the question? But it doesn't go back beyond that to your childhood, that you were a susceptible person?
But see, now what you're doing what made me so angry.
Something that I thought was funny was that Betty Friedan goes on a talk show, and I actually couldn't figure out what show it was, and they never named the host. It wasn't until I looked in the credits that I realized this was a young Johnny Carson.
And so,
well, it seems like you got a runaway bestseller on your hands.
And it seems like you have a habit of interrupting.
I didn't realize the set was so blue, as most of this era's footage that still exists is preserved in black and white. I might have to hand in my late night talk show card. Check it out, Mrs. America. It was produced by FX or FXX. I don't even know the difference. And it's on Hulu, which is where I watched it. So check it out. And we'll see you next time.